there are some people here. Hello, Brenda.
Hi, Sharyn. How are you?
Okay. How are you? Are you getting any sleep?
Yeah, actually, the baby is a surprisingly good sleeper. He's been sleeping 12 hours a night almost since like 2 months. Every once in a while, he'll have a night that's not great, but much better
Okay.
than my first.
Oh, you have another. How old is your first?
She's 2,
Oh, okay. Sounds
almost
like
3.
my
Yeah.
son. Hi, Alice.
Hi, Sharyn. I decided I wanted to see you and you could see me.
Okay.
We
Okay.
haven't seen each other in a while.
No. I'm not, you said not to introduce you, so I
Right,
won't. You
but
can
you
introduce
can.
yourself if
No,
you
you
like.
can. You can.
What is that?
I said you can.
Okay. Alice is my sister-in-law, my late husband's sister. And she
Hi.
lives on Long Island,
Oh,
and she got mixed up with the time and thought it was a different time. But anyway, she's here. And she
Yes,
likes to read, which is why she's here.
I was actually 3 hours early.
Yeah, because you're in New York. Where
Of
are you,
course.
Brenda? You're in Texas?
No, of
Brenda?
course I'm
No,
in.
no. Brenda?
Oh,
I'm in Texas. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Where are you, Sharyn? Seattle. I see in your.
Yes. Yeah, I've been here about 7 years, but I still have my New York accent. So I'm still.
You do.
Hi, Meredith.
Alice, how's the weather there? Did you get any snow over the weekend? And Alice?
oh, I'm sorry. No, I mean, we had some flurries by me
Yeah.
on Long Island was really nothing, but my cousin lives in New Jersey and they had about 3 inches and the driving was treacherous. It was just a sheet of ice. They were going to their son's 50th birthday party where everybody had to turn around and go home. It was terrible.
Oh
Yeah,
dear. Oh
Russell,
dear. Yes.
Russell, Sharyn was going to be turn 50.
Who was?
Russell, Andy's son, Russell.
He was a little boy. What happened?
No, my darling.
See what happens, Brenda? You have those babies and suddenly they're 50.
Right.
Brenda, I wanted to ask you something. I have your bio, but it's a little bit old. I have that you were working on a novel about a woman in the Dominican Republic. Does that have a name, a title? Have you finished it, or are
I
you still working
I
on it?
haven't finished it. I'm still working on it. It's called The Furious Branches.
Okay. Should I mention that? The Furious Branches? That's the title?
If you'd like, sure.
Oh,
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah, actually, more relevant is I have a novella coming out in the summer called Time's Agent, which is about it's a little bit of a time travel novel about well, anyway.
Oh, okay. Times Agent, you said?
Time's Agent.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm not. There's a little buzz in your voice, so that's why. Times Agent or
Oh,
Page?
Time's Agent.
Agent. Okay.
Brenda, what is this image behind you?
Yes.
So I went to a residency a few years ago where they had joined, it was Vermont Studio Center. They had half of them were artists and half of them were writers. And I befriended one of the resident artists, and he had all of this art that was crumbling. And he said, "You can just take it, please." And I got a whole bunch of art for really cheap. But his artist's vision is that he has this narrative of the apocalypse that he paints. And so this is like don't know if you can see it, the fourth horseman of the apocalypse.
Oh,
And
yes.
he's got this whole narrative of these like little spheres that dragonflies carry on their back, sort of saving the world. And it's interesting. So I have a whole bunch of paintings from him that follow the narrative of the apocalypse and then the saving afterwards, which I thought was cool. And I like the idea of an artist who's also a narrative artist.
Well,
Right.
the
And I
apocalypse
like
is
the
kind of interesting theme since we're talking about the touches.
For sure.
Hi, Bob.
Hi, Sharon. Good to see you,
Yeah.
everybody.
And
Happy New Year.
Donna's all the way from Spain.
Oh, hi, Donna.
Wow.
Hi,
Wow.
Jane.
Hi, Stephanie. How are you?
Good to see everybody. My goodness.
And Jane?
Yes.
Ballet?
Wow. Everyone's quiet. Oh, it's 11 o'clock. Okay, we can stop fooling around. Okay, first. Oh, and Ava. Okay, let's wait a couple of minutes.
I would love to hear more about this group and how you all met or got together or signed up.
Tamarah, do you want to describe it?
Sure.
It's kind of a blended group of people who are interested in global affairs as well as literary topics. Tamarah was involved with the literary committee, and I don't see Diane. Sometimes when Diane is here, she's involved with the global affairs. So it's kind of a mixture of the two, and a lot of other people, other people who are interested in the book, in writing, in writers. So that's pretty much what the group is, and it's based, even though we're not there, it's based in the Rainier Club, which is a social club in Seattle. So that's the basic construct of it. And anyone else can add to it.
No, I think that's about it. This was a very long running group that we tried to get going for almost a year, I think, just to make sure that we had everything ready and organized. There was a lovely woman who was a good friend of ours at the Rainier Club. Her name was Janice Weinmiller, and she was trying to work on getting the calendar and the dates and everything together so that we could go through this book and we could discuss it, and it could be this just wonderful experience of talking about the world through literature and through literary narratives. And she tragically passed away with our hearts last year. She lived a very good life. She was surrounded by her family, and we're all better people for knowing her. And then Diane Cotman is the chair of global affairs, as Sharon was saying, and public and global affairs. And she took up the mantle of continuing to spearhead this group. And we have had just absolutely the most amazing discussions for the past year. I mean, at least I think it's been a
Well,
year.
since about June.
Hmm?
Since around June, since the summer.
I think so. So
Yes.
almost not a year, but it feels like a year.
Well, it will be a year.
Also, it will be a year.
Year-long program.
You know, I didn't really major in math or time, and so I'm a poet. I'm like it's a year-ish, and so, but that's where we're at, and so we're so grateful that we have Brenda here today to tell us about your story, and we want to thank Sharyn especially for organizing all this and making sure that we have such incredible, meaty discussions. And so that.
Thank you. You did the introduction. So now it's Brenda's turn. Brenda, would you like to say something about your story, your writing, anything at all about your work?
Sure. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to chatting with you all. Um, it's always fun to have discussions on life, the world, writing, work. Um, so I guess we're here to talk about the touches in some part. And that particular story, I get a lot of questions about from my collection that came out because it looks like I had some kind of future sight since it was published in 2019, maybe November or something like that. So maybe October. So it was published a few months before the pandemic started, and I'd written it maybe a year before that. And it's, of course, about a pandemic and has a lot of the touch hunger themes that I think people who quarantined the pandemic ended up feeling. For me, the reason why, so I get a lot of questions about like, how could you have seen this coming or things that imply I have some kind of future sight. But at the time, I had just moved to a new city where I didn't know anybody. I just moved to Orlando, Florida. And my husband and I were ambivalent about having a kid. Couldn't decide if we wanted one or not. And so, fast forward 2 years later, the pandemic happens. I had a baby with a lot of postpartum depression and a lot of, grappling with what have we done and how are we going to love this child into the world. But at the time, all I knew was that I had this deep-seated loneliness that I didn't know what to do with. So, of course, I wanted to write about it. And figuring out how to write a story about something that was still close to my heart, literally, but also figuring out how to contain the story so that it could talk about this loneliness in its sort of most concentrated form was how the story ended up being about pandemic. I figured, how do I put this woman in a box so that all she can do is explore the extent to which she needs other people and what is she willing to do to reach out. So that is how the story ended up being about a pandemic, and it's the loneliness of the human heart.
Okay, a couple of things I want to mention. This story is from The Rock Eaters, which is Brenda's collection of short fiction. And she has a new book coming out, Times Agent. So be aware. I think you have her bio on the site, but I just want to mention she's a creative writing professor at the University of Houston, and she's won many prizes for her short stories. So let's go on from there. In listening to you, I had, and in reading the story, I had the impression that a basic question is, what does it mean to be human? What is a human in this? Because you have a character who's pretty much in a bubble and has an avatar who kind of goes out into the world. How did you resolve that? It sounds like you have a personal background related to this, but it's also in the story. This need for human contact, this need for what it means to be human. And in creating a new life, you definitely have some hope there, because this human is going to eventually go out into the dirty world, I'm assuming. So can we talk a little bit about that? I don't want to put you on the spot about that. Maybe someone else might have some ideas on that.
I also think it's about AI. We're so aware of that now. And
Well,
it's
yes.
every day. And in
Mhm.
today's newspaper, even every day you see something about AI coming into human life in some way, misleading or with a commercial or something like that. And
Exactly.
it's a very sci-fi, a-fi world in there.
Yeah, when maybe I should go back a little bit. When I saw you at AWP, you mentioned during your talk, one of your talks that I saw, near science fiction. Can you explain to everyone what that means?
Yeah, near future science fiction,
Okay,
or
sorry.
near future fiction.
Right.
Yeah, I see a lot of writers sort of rethinking the way that science fiction has traditionally been, far out there. Like when people were reading Ray Bradbury, Martian Chronicles, the idea is that, it's something so far away, another planet, that it feels sufficiently like fantasy. It's a secondary world. But a lot of writers are reimagining the ways in which that technology is accelerating so much that something that we imagine today, 2 years from now, will just be rote. Another example from that particular story is that there's a lot of emphasis on virtual reality and the ways in which it can do things like simulate pregnancy or do other things. And one of the things that happened in the pandemic was I bought myself an Oculus Quest. And I ended up spending a lot of time, one, getting very good at the Jedi lightsaber dojo. I am a very good Jedi. So I spent a lot of time perfecting my lightsaber technique. I spent a lot of time laying out on this virtual beach with, some tranquil waves flowing over my head. And I played some other video games, but I also spent some time I forget what they were called, but basically it was a way that you could go to an event and have other people sit next to you. And so I went to a jellyfish viewing hosted by an aquarium, and I went to a Metallica concert in VR. And the technology is not, or at the time was not developed enough that you could see facial features, but you could see people go up and down. You could see their hands in real time and their arms, and you could see their head. And that was enough to completely capture headbanging for the Metallica concert. I really felt like I was right in the middle of a Metallica concert. And you could hear conversations happen around you. And you could move seats. And if you move seats next to somebody, their conversation would get louder. And if you moved away, it would get, so you could, pick and choose which conversations you entered into. But a lot of people would not, I mean, to a certain extent, that still feels science fiction, even though 2 years ago I was in the middle of it. And I think there's so much about the way that technology has accelerated that is forcing us into our own futures prematurely. I feel like you had 20 years to sort of come around to the idea of the internet, and now we have, some product is announced and we have a year later it's already out and we're having to figure out how we feel about it. So that's an interesting, I think, dilemma of people in the world, but for me, a fiction writer trying to imagine the future and imagine human hearts in the future. And the future feels like, give it 6 hours and here we go.
Okay,
One thing,
I guess that's why I thought at base there's the question of what is a human, because of the AI, because of all the other things that you bring to it. And well, if you've read the story, at the end, it seems that she's choosing the human side. And that's why I asked the question. But someone else had a hand up or a question?
that it was
Okay.
Meredith. I should use my hand, I guess.
Okay.
Anyway, raise hand. So speaking to your near future, something that occurred to me as I was reading it is, there's the idea of choosing to live in a seemingly perfect fantasy as opposed to facing the ugliness of real life. Well, I see that every day as people post on Facebook and other places where they're creating this perfect fantasy life. Everybody is smiling, they look perfect, and they may be denying or covering up some of the things that are not so beautiful in their lives.
Yeah, I think that's so essential to what it means to be human in a way that I often, when I write, think about what is unseen. And it's a current obsession of mine because while I am cheating on my novel, I'm trying to write a novella where somebody is also walking through a world that is colored by augmented reality, so they can choose to completely unsee certain things and sort of overlay a different reality over it. So they're still moving through the world, unlike in virtual reality, but they can choose to not see homeless people because it's papered over. The homeless encampment is papered over with digital ads, that kind of thing. But I think most of us don't have enough bandwidth to see everything that's right there in front of us. We're either too self-involved, or we're busy, or we don't have enough to sort of pay attention to every single second of our lives everywhere around us. And so to me, that's one of the heartbreaks of being human, is what are we not seeing, and what heartbreak is there? And so for me as a fiction writer, I'm always trying to unearth or excavate what's unseen. But I think there's so much of that as we move more and more into digital spaces and digital worlds, how much both opportunity there is in seeing new things, because now we can create anything with virtual reality or computer overlays or simulations. AI can pretend to be anything. On the other hand, given all that opportunity, what are we leaving by the wayside? And I used to be a computer scientist. That was my undergrad, and I worked in computer security for a time. So I'm not necessarily a tech pessimist. I do think there's so much opportunity. But I do think that there's always a cost to opportunity, and knowing that when you go forward, like I am, all the opportunity to spend time in a virtual world, what am I giving up along the way, and what's going unseen while I move through a different space is something that's really, I think, important to think about as a human. And it doesn't even need technology to necessitate the question. I mean, how many times do we move through, walk down a street or drive past a certain thing and not know what's inside, or not pay attention to the people talking by the side of the road, or whatever it is that we're looking past?
Stephanie?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't find the raise hand button. The other question I have for you, it seems that the quote virtual reality is more than that. It becomes a lifesaver. If it weren't for a nan or the nanny robot taking care of her, she wouldn't survive. She wouldn't be alive. So there is that interesting aspect you've got in the story about humanity and its ability to survive without the artificial intelligence, because they would have been wiped out by diseases, apparently, according in the dirty world. And when she makes a choice, she's not sure if she's going to survive or not, is she? I mean, the world hasn't changed, and she's made this choice to get dirty, so to speak, on many levels. And I'd like to hear you talk more about that, if you don't mind. It seems like it's a life choice.
Yeah. One thing that I could not have foreseen, although maybe I should have, when thinking about the pandemic and this, separation between the people who go out of their quarantine and the people who don't and are still in their boxes is, having seen everything we saw in the pandemic and the politics that fell out because of it. And that's something that I didn't include in the story because I just didn't think, I thought there would be a subset of people who were rebelling, but I thought it would be an eyes open sort of rebelling. And so for me, the end of the story is she's rebelling not because she's anti-government or anti-quarantine or anything like that, but just because she has this desperation inside of her. And I think what we had because of the quarantine was a different sort of rebellion or, anti-quarantine that was very much, I think, pinned on different versions of reality and not seeing other versions in a way that the end of that story, I'm imagining her walking out and she knows that she's probably going to die, or that her and her partner are probably going to die, or even if they don't die right away, it's a matter of time. And she's willing to deal with that cost because of her own desperation, because of her own love, because of this like throbbing heart that just is pushing her out. But not the kind of thing, she isn't the kind of person who would have gone out and been like, I'll be fine, everything's fine. The problem is all those other people in those boxes who just, they're really clinging on to that quarantine that they just can't shake. So it was an interesting, I think, mismatch between what I imagined and what ended up happening. And I don't know if it was inevitable that the politics of who quarantined and who didn't fell out that way, or if it was just a condition of, the current politics at the time in 2020, or if no matter, what happened, things would have shaken out that way to one side or another, that it would have been a matter of what versions of reality are we leaving unseen, rather than let's go into this wide open, we're just making a different choice about what we want our own consequences to be. And I think there were some people who did that, but I don't think that by and large that was the narrative, at least in the US.
You're in a way mentioning a little bit about your writing process when you're saying you weren't quite sure which way it would go. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, my writing process, to be honest, I am not a funny person. And I think the best writing either makes us laugh or cry. And since I can't make anyone laugh, at least I can try for the cry. So when I think about a story, a character, a scenario, I always try to think about what's the heartbreak here. So for that story, I think I started it because of this feeling of loneliness, and then I put her in a box and gave her some problems to deal with. There's a robot, her robot doesn't work, a kid is on the way, and her husband is lying to her and possibly cheating on her. So I give her some problems. But in the end, that doesn't really make necessarily for a good story until I figure out like, well, what's going to break her heart about all of this? And for me, it's always, my endings are almost always this bittersweet. I don't think of making someone cry as, primarily I need to hit them with utter tragedy. But more that I'm thinking of heartbreak as this bittersweet thing, this thing that both calls us back and calls us forward. A guitar string that can only strum because it's taut between two ends. So that's normally what I think of when I think of heartbreak, like the things that we want so desperately and that we can almost have, and yet they cost us, or they break us somewhat along the way, or they show us who we really are in a way that that gives us this feeling of tragedy or heartbreak. So that's more or less how I write even my realistic stories, but also even my most far-fetched stories. There's a story in the collection that is about aliens arriving on Earth, and the ending is very much, just this bittersweet. But I started it by thinking about like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if aliens landed? I got this image of aliens flying a kite. And then I was like, oh, okay, it's an interesting image. And they were singing to the kites as they were flying. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting image. Aliens singing, flying kites. And so I thought, okay, where's the heartbreak? And my next thought was they're singing about their lost homeworld. So they can never go back. And they're singing about this planet that they lost. And that's why they came here. But I didn't really want to write about the aliens because it would have pushed me a lot more into harder sci-fi than I was prepared to write at the time. I didn't really want to write about like an alien race and this alien planet. I was more interested in humans. So I thought, okay, but what would break a human's heart about watching these aliens sing about their lost homeworld? And that's when I came up with a scenario about, I think she feels responsible for something for some of this tragedy that's happened to them. And so then from there, it was when they arrived, everyone freaked out and there was a genocide and she was part of it. And it's only later that they found out these aliens have a language, they weren't here to harm us, et cetera, et cetera. But she still feels very much responsible for this legacy, I guess, of genocide. But anyway, so all of that to say was that's sort of how I think about my process, is thinking about where's the heartbreak here.
The heartbreak, but you said also bittersweet. So there is a sweet side to it. And I felt it in this story. I felt it when she went out with, when she was outside, when she was in Dirty with Nan. And I felt it a little bit with her husband, with Taylor. Not so, I'm sorry, not with Nan, with Alicia. And I'm wondering about the other characters who are lurking around, because they are part of the story, like Firma and the workers. What's their role in this? Because they are part of the story.
Yeah, for this particular character, her heartbreak has to do with loneliness. So what better way to prod and explore that sort of part than put people around her with whom she can almost connect, almost have that moment of feeling surrounded by love, and it's taken away from her, not entirely not of her own doing. Because to me, I think that's the part that really gets me about people, is not necessarily the things that were done to us, but the things that we're actually responsible for and we did to ourselves. And so for this particular character, I was interested not just in, oh, we've been put in quarantine boxes, this happened to me, and it's a tragedy and I'm a victim and I've got to get out, which I think could easily be a good book about, somebody who's going to fight the man and get out of the quarantine boxes that they were put in, and there's going to be a government total collapse because she's, working for the government too, and she's going to go and take over and become president of whatever country they've made. And that could be a very good book, but that's not necessarily the book that I was interested in. I was more interested in, she's responsible in some part for her own isolation or her own suffering, because we all are, like, to a certain extent. Yes, we're capable of being victims, but we are also, very much a victim of ourselves. And that to me is the saddest thing that can happen to us, is all those regrets at the end of a life when we think, there's where I went wrong and I did it. there's where I pushed that person I loved away. And yeah, they pushed back, but it wasn't that they, screwed me over. And that's why oh, I had a part to play in that too. And to me, that's the most honest way of looking at what humans do is not just what's been done to them, but what do we do to ourselves?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Personal responsibility is definitely part of being human, or for most of us. Meredith, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I thought that this section was really sensuous. Wait, Alicia says, she pushes her ball up to mine, lining up our breeches. She put a finger through, her fingertips suddenly on my palm. At first, I'm revolted. All the microbes from her hands, from everything she's ever touched, cultured underneath her fingernails and attaching to me. Then the soft rub, the heat of her fingertip, the prickle of the virgin sensation. It feels like joy and pain at once, everything forbidden.
Brenda, anything about that section?
Thank you.
Can I say, I would love to, I mean, that was the biggest moment of, I
Yeah,
mean, that's what changed. And what I thought that was so interesting was that she had the feminine position in that. And so she was accepting the finger from the other woman. And then she was feeling the want and need. And I thought that was so consistent with the beginning, the middle, and the end, that she
yeah,
had the feminine position of accepting the touch. And you had so many just staggeringly brilliant motifs in here, because you had food and you had hunger, but then there was the spaces, and there was in and out of the body. You were eating the food and it was entering the body. There was a baby in the body. There was the finger that went into her capsule, and then her husband at the end entered her home, her domicile, her box. And I thought that it was so interesting because I never saw her leave anything. And that was something that she wanted. And I think for me, when I read that, that was the need that I saw that she had, was she wanted to reach out. And sometimes there are barriers that we just put up and we just don't know how. And so if I can go just a little bit off script, because when I read this, I'm reading it from my perspective. And so from, just if I wrote this, what would it be like? I seriously did not read, regardless that there are robots, I didn't read it as an entirely futuristic story, because it felt to me, and I might be wrong on this, but I'm going to say it anyway. It felt to me like an immigrant story, because when you have language barriers and when you are in a box, when you feel closed in a new world that you cannot access, and you're worried about the future and the future of your children, how can your children live in this world that you aren't familiar with? Everything that I read from the beginning to the end felt like an immigrant story. And so when you think about the in and out of the spaces, that feels like I want to be a part of this new world, but how do you even begin? How do you even leave? It's just such a new, terrifying concept. Um, and so and also it feels like there are interior spaces and there are exterior spaces. It almost feels like the sense of liminality is just so pervasive in the entire story, that nothing is set, that even the living things that are in the world are just symptoms of life and death. Even the starlings are invasive. Everything just feels like it is hardly permanent. And I know I'm throwing like a million questions out, but I had a million questions when I read this, and I have much more. But I would love if you could say something about maybe the liminality between the spaces. Do you see any difference between the interior spaces and the exterior spaces, and the doorways maybe? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, that's such a great rumination on it. I honestly, I feel a bit seen considering that I wrote the story somewhat based on putting a character based on myself in, you know, a futuristic scenario. And I'm very much I think that is definitely the problem that plagues me, is that feeling of being a child of immigrants, and also immigrants who didn't want didn't want to let their daughter out of the home anyways. That I find myself plagued through my adult life by this feeling of like, how do I even begin, or how do I even enter, um and wait, how do I even reach out, and that feeling of just like wanting and hoping but waiting for other people to come is definitely I would say a symptom of my life. But yeah, it's interesting that you peg that as sort of feeling like an immigrant sort of mentality had sort of pervaded the setup of the world, because I think that is probably true, because it's definitely where part of my own loneliness was coming from. And so that feeling of liminality, I feel more and more like everything around us right now is in that space of liminality. I feel, maybe it's because I'm, you know, my husband's very into video games. We both teach what feel to us a little bit like children. I know I'm teaching college, he's teaching high school, but it's weird to get older and older and older, and the people we're teaching just keep resetting and resetting to be the same age. And so there's definitely a feeling when we're thinking about what our lives are going to be like, that we're sort of resetting to a different clock every time, that nothing that we feel like has stable the relationships we're forming just sort of keep resetting every year. And the people that we're talking to, our students, are definitely even more pessimistic about the world, I think, than we are. There's just that feeling of environmental collapse on the horizon, and a feeling that social media has sort of is going to run us into a very, or has already, post-apocalyptic dystopic scenario. There's generally a feeling that late capitalism has sort of run to a conclusion where we are addicted to, I mean, I am too, like something like Temu. I don't know if you all shop on Temu or Shine,
No.
but
Maybe just take a second to explain it.
yeah, Temu is this, it's a gamified shopping app where you can get like super, super cheap stuff. And I have been on it because I was like, a $1 toy for my 3-year-old. Yes. Now I don't have to buy her $20 toys. I can just sort of throw these little $1 things at her, from questionable origins. And they gamify the app. So you can download an app on your phone, but you can also buy in web browser, where they're like, spin the wheel to get 90% off your next item. And so anyway, if you're engaging with the world like that, where you're on social media all the time, you're not really making friends in person anymore, you are buying everything through this gamified experience of, you know, keep pressing the button and spinning the wheel, and that's your life now, it can feel very much like the world is ending, or like it's maybe not ending in the way that at the end there will be nothing, but it may be ending in the way that at the end we've found ourselves trapped in lives we don't like, and we don't realize how we got into this situation to begin with. It seemed so easy when I first downloaded the app, and then, you know, cut to 2 months later, and instead of doom scrolling on Twitter or whatever it is, I'm doom scrolling on Temu to see if I can find the right $1 little slingshot toy for my daughter. But anyway, so I think probably a lot of that liminality comes from a generational feeling of this is our world does not feel permanent in so many ways, and in fact feels accelerating towards a conclusion that we both cannot stop and do not like.
But I saw another hand, but it's not. That's really interesting to me because I've been watching social media and seeing what's happening to us with that. I'm just wondering, as a computer scientist in a way, if you think that the all of those games, machines, gadgets, whatever we have, if they're training us not to be human. In other words, they're training us in a way, like as you said, you push a button and this wheel goes, and then you push another button and the wheel goes. Is it in a way training us to be a certain kind of way that feels alien to us?
I don't think it's machines that are doing it. I think it's people are making conscious efforts to make our experiences this way because the more money. I mean,
Yeah.
I've recently in my spare time, I have a tech startup idea that I've been pursuing, but I've been listening to a lot of, pitfalls of your first tech startup, and this is how you start up and keep user engagement, and all these videos that and one of them was, I guess there was a guy who got very famous for a book on tech startups, but he talked about how to keep the users coming back. And his whole thing is you got to gamify it. You got to addict them. You got to keep them coming back. And this was before, in the last few years, Facebook has gotten a lot of very specific bad rap about it coming out that it's bad for teens and can and Facebook is running social experiments on us by showing us more pessimistic content because it keeps us engaged for longer on the app. So these are choices that it's not that AI is making these choices for us. It's humans are training the AIs to do these things, which then makes us respond the way that any human would. I mean, we are susceptible to gamification, to enticement, but we've always been. And it's not something that, technology has come around and now we are at the worst point that civilization has always been. Because of course there have been, feudalism must not have felt very great. We've got all kinds of incitement to want to get more on a shorter term, because as humans, we're just short-term thinkers. And it's just the human condition that we don't realize what is happening to us because we've made all these decisions that seem really great on the short term. And, over the long term, we're like, oh, that was a terrible idea, but I can only see it now accumulated over years. There's this really good book called, I don't remember who wrote it, called Slow Violence. And it talks a lot about the violence of neocolonialization, that we allow it to happen because it happens so slowly we don't even realize it's happening. And he specifically was talking about, I believe, water rights of the indigenous people, how it's been sort of eroded and eroded and eroded so slowly. And I found it really apt to so much of what happens is this idea of slow violence. It's not any less violent because it happens slowly and we don't even realize it's happening.
It sounds like a lot of this goes back to what you were saying about personal responsibility, that we're making the choices to do this for various reasons. Either we're creating these things for profit, or we're experiencing them as participants in it. So where does some optimism come in? How do we change that? Is it possible to change?
Yeah, I'm not the right person to ask that question
I thought,
because
okay.
I have the same questions. I do think that there's a lot in the US that seems inevitable and unchangeable because, to a certain extent, my generation for sure, but a lot of us have checked out of what's going on at local levels, what's going on slowly, and what's been sort of chipped away moment by moment by moment. And I think it's not that these things are unchangeable, it's that we haven't been paying attention to the ways in which they are, or things as simple as local elections, or small policy decisions. And I'm not the right person to tell people how to go about that, because I feel like I'm trapped in a lot of the same bubble. But I do know that there are amazing people out there who are, talking about that, and maybe even some of you are doing that good work.
Stephanie?
I have a question. Is your generation, interested even in what is currently going on? You said that they're not as involved in politics and so on. And the big concern with this coming election is seeing if your generation will even vote. There is so much lack of interest in prior elections. And if this is the case, is this because, does gaming have anything to do with that? That it's a disconnect from the reality? In your story, it's not the normal thing we experience, such as the COVID situation, because this is life-threatening, life or death. When she goes out to this, it's a choice of, I can die now because of the germs or whatever. It's not the same world. There's nothing physically there like it was when we left the cocoon of COVID and went out back into the world. Is your generation not interested in the reality of what the world is at this time, or because of the gaming, perhaps? I don't know.
Yeah, I hesitate to be a spokesperson for my entire generation, but I think I can say it's not the gaming. My husband is a gamer, and at least during the pandemic, I did my fair share on the Oculus Rift. I don't think what is going on is that games themselves, video games, are some kind of stand-in. At least, I mean, I'm sure for any individual person, like, it might be that, but not on a generational level. Because one of the things that I think, things like gamified apps, gamified smartphones, those aren't video games in the way that people think about, like, oh, there's a guy in a basement who has his Xbox or whatever it is. But someone like my mom, she's really bad on the smartphone. Like, we have entire dinners and it's me, and I'm a millennial. It's my sister who's 10 years younger, and she's an aught. I don't know what you call the people in the aughts. And my mom is the worst of us because she has fallen down this rabbit hole of Twitter, where it's not algorithms that are doing this, although maybe the algorithms are showing her this content more. But my mom has specifically decided to follow people who have this incendiary rhetoric, who keep her coming back, and she set all the notifications. And so she can't go through dinner without being on her phone all the time. We're like, hey mom, like, one day we'd love to actually have a conversation with you. And she's not, because she's like in Twitter and she's being like, do you know what has happened elsewhere in the world? Because Ray Martin. And I'm like, who's Ray Martin? And why are you listening to Ray Martin at this moment when your daughters are right in front of you wanting to be like, how was your day? So I don't think that that my generation specifically is, has fallen down a gaming rabbit trap. because everything is gamified now. And in fact, I think the younger generations are sort of natives to understanding the ways in which that can just eat up your time. But I do think that my generation specifically, I would say there was an apoliticalness in the air. There was a sense that there wasn't much of a difference between Clinton and Bush in that particular election. I'm not saying by people who are very into politics, I'm saying like a type of youth that like has been insulated by the politics and a general feeling of like, I lived in Florida, which is was a purple state, but there were a lot of states that voted for Bill Clinton when they were otherwise red and were purple in a way that they are not now, because there was a sense that like, these politicians, yeah, they have, some outer differences, but in the end, they're just politicians and we're going to vote for charisma. And I think specifically the generation that was sort of beginning to be aware, but not really savvy in any way about politics, that in that generation, I think there was a sense that politics didn't much matter. In ways that things have become so polarized now, and we can talk about the benefits and the traps of that too, but things are polarized now such that I don't think somebody who's progressive would be like, it's all the same. Although of course people did talk about Bernie Sanders being sort of on the cusp of that. But yeah, so it's less of like we don't pay attention than I think there was a certain like acculturation of apoliticalness. Like, don't pay attention to politics. That doesn't really touch you in many ways. Like, these laws don't really matter much. There was an assumption that trickle down theory was a given.
But lately, with what's going on with the violence and the January 6th insurrection and the threat to the very democracy that we have. Aside from politicians, the democracy itself is at stake in many people's eyes.
And I think that narrative and the polarization of that narrative has absolutely shaken a lot of people out of.
But has it shaken your generation? That's what I'm wondering. We're finding since COVID, since the pandemic is over, in certain areas, the younger people are not coming back. Not that they did in the beginning, but to the theater, to the arts, to other things like that. They're not engaging again they seem to engage in bars and going out, in restaurants. I think that's flourishing. But the arts is, and I don't know about people voting or registering to vote.
I'd love to think
I just, if you can add to your response, Brenda, what about the people who are younger, who you're seeing as students? How are they responding to this? Because you are a different generation from them, obviously. I've taught too, and I know they seem to be younger and younger every year as you get older. But if you can bring them in too, a little bit.
Yeah. I am interested in the reasons why people go back to in-person versus not. I think there's a lot of debate on college campuses right now about, well, I'll say there's a lot of debate in general in society about what it means to go back in person to something, what it means to attend life in the various ways that we think about attendance, like going to a performance, going to the movies, going to things. And I do think that there is a split, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, between how people think of attendance and attendance in their own lives. And part of that was propelled by the work from home that happened, the ability to engage with people on virtual spaces. But I don't know that all of that is bad. I mean, there's a big debate now in, for example, in the English department, in literary theory where they talk about what is a text. Students, there's a big crisis around reading. Students are reading less. Pre-pandemic, a lot of that narrative was they're not reading books. So society is dying because they're not reading books. And I'm a fiction writer, so I'm particularly, that feels close to my heart and partial to that narrative. They should be reading books. I write books. They should read books. But they are reading content, and they're not reading, but they are engaging and attending their life in a different way. And I think it would be a mistake to say they're not attending. They are disengaging. I think it takes a lot of thinking to be like, in what are the different ways they're attending their lives, and where's the art or the value in that? Like, does somebody creating a Roblox video game, does that mean they're not attending to the arts? Does that mean that they are absent from real life in some way, or are they engaging with something that, are they making meaningful connections with? I mean, Roblox it's got a challenge, but to a certain extent, they are attending. They're attending these spaces that are very configured by the tech developers' conception of the ways in which they could engage. The great thing about being in person is that, there are certain rules of decorum about like the ways you engage at the opera and how you are a good audience member. But outside of it, you meet people randomly. And so tech developers haven't necessarily created the same kinds of spaces, but they are getting close. And if they allow themselves to think about, I think this is a tech problem in the end. I don't know, but I have sort of a tech mentality about these things. I think if the tech is well designed, it can be very good. And if the tech is badly designed, then it leads to dystopia. But maybe I'm putting too much credit on the people who make these things. I don't know. What do you think? Or has some other ideas?
I'd love to just jump in really briefly. So I have 5 children, and my oldest is 20 and my youngest just turned 12. And what's interesting to watch them engage with the world is that they're engaging in the same narratives, they're engaging in the same conversations, but they're doing it through different mediums. So one of the best examples that I've seen was there was one time I graduated with my master's in 2020, so naturally we did not have a commencement ceremony. I got to do that 2 years later, which was great. Got to walk, super wonderful. And what was interesting was the gentleman who was the commencement speaker, who I don't remember his name, but he was the senior editor of the Wall Street Journal, I believe. And so he was talking about the life of journalists today and the dangers that they face and the risks that they take. And all my children were watching it with me, and so they listened to it. And it was interesting because afterwards there was so much to process, because this was a window into just a much bigger world rather than just watching, the evening news or reading the news with mom. This was all of a sudden something that meant something as a career and as a person, and, what is happening in other parts of the world. And so they were actually very quiet, but after about half an hour, they came back and they showed me this entire museum that had been created in Minecraft. And it was dedicated to fallen journalists, with their pictures and a bio and links to their work and what they were working on and how they died. And it was this entire, just hundreds of pictures. And that was a different way of engaging with the world. And so that's what I see is interesting. And so my sister is a millennial, I'm Gen X. And so the way that she engages in the world is completely different from me, because when I grew up, we had the newspaper every morning. And I was taught by my grandparents how to read the newspaper every morning. And I don't do that now, but I still go to websites for my news, as opposed to my sister who uses Instagram. And so it's just different methods. So it I have a very stubborn hope for the future, because there's always different ways of engaging with the world. I remember just in undergrad when we read about the dangers of newspapers in the late 1700s, because these young men were squandering their lives drinking coffee in cafes and just reading newspapers of all things. And so there's always going to be something that we will adapt to. And I feel like we adapt to it in ways that make the world more accessible, but also that makes empathy more accessible. And I think that that is the most important aspect of adapting and changing. That's my TED Talk.
Well, I'd like to believe that too.
I think reading even fiction was considered,
Oh,
something that only floozies did.
Right.
yeah, exactly.
And now we have graphic novels, so it's taking it to another place. Anything, we're getting toward the end.
Ava
So,
has a question, I think.
Yeah.
who's that? Ava, okay.
Right. It's okay. So I don't know, Brenda or any of you in the audience know about Ian McEwan, who wrote Atonement, and also he wrote another novel. It is about the baby and the robot. So the family hired a robot, and when they had a baby, and Ian McEwan wrote this story totally from a different perspective. The perspective is the baby and the robot develop kind of emotions and the relationship. And also robot is fighting for mother's attention and love and all that. And the robot become a family. I have not finished the book to the end of it, but it seems that he is more, we normally we have this resistance to robot, to technology, to we consider them as aliens. Probably we are ourselves become more and more aliens to what the world is supposed to be. We are only on Earth. There are so many planets on this universe. So he turned into different way to talk about how humans should adapt to machines, to a different type of species, not human. Maybe they are human as well, but just we don't know at all. It's a whole another world. Back to the gaming industry. I'm just making random comments here, not in good order or necessarily to anything at all. The gaming industry, I don't know. There is an Activation Blizzard. Probably Brenda, your husband is a gamer. Know this big company, and Microsoft is offering $69 billion to buy it, to buy this Activation Blizzard, which is all about the video game. So from there you can see the trend is it can only get bigger and bigger, more dominant, more profitable, more pervasive, use that word. And big corporations are getting involved into this because they are making money. And people just, young people just are addicted to games, video games, and they see where the money is. So it's not only about technology, about the invention, about discovery, about your desire, but most of all, it's about who makes the big bucks. Yeah. And that is a part of a culture. And we just have to, I don't know, go along with it and try to live in it and adapt to it. Like this robot and mother and the kid, they develop this love, affections to each other. They live together in one household.
Well, with that, wow, it sounds like we're going to be living in a game world. I don't know. I have to process
I
that.
know, but I think that, as we keep work, it's just the human condition. It must stay the human condition. We have to be able to touch each other. And I really appreciate this dystopian short story with the optimism of human connection, because sometimes in fiction that's missing. And so this touch, and I don't want to take up everyone's time analyzing this because I think that I could.
Go ahead.
But
You're good at that time.
I know. But the very first sentence is, I've been touched exactly 4 times in real life. Like, thank you. That was the first sentence. That's exactly what it was. And so I knew exactly what I was going to read. And that was one of the most beautifully crafted short stories that I've read in a long time, I
Oh,
think.
thank you so much. Thank you for reading. And I really appreciate chatting with you all today. This was fun.
Yeah.
Dystopias aside.
Right. So there is hope. There is some
Indeed.
optimism.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you so much.
Yes.
This is a wonderful thing that happened as a result of COVID. We can all Zoom, because I don't remember doing this before
Oh.
the pandemic. And this has been a very wonderful. And I remember when cell phones came out and people thought they were terrible. So maybe
Now
there's
live with
And
it.
they might be.
For your mother.
yeah, your mother. they
Yeah,
might
if
be.
you look at my mother, you would say they might be, but it's not the young people that are
Yeah, but it's not
necessarily
just
following.
it's not just the phone. It's not that. It's existed. That's part of human condition. If you listen to some of the advertisements on TV about people with gambling addictions and so on, it becomes a form of addiction of a sort. And humans are prone to addictions of different kinds. So this Instagram or Twitter is as also addictive, I guess.
Yeah, I would say that the human condition is probably wanting more. And you get into these feedback loops where people who can get more will get more at somebody's expense, especially if they frame it to that person as, you could get more in the short term if you do this thing that will get me more in the long term. And then it's just this. I think that's just what's going on with tech companies, is they can get more, and so they do, and nobody stopped them. And anyway, it's not just tech companies, it's everybody. It's us, it's me.
Does
But
anyone else have a question or a comment?
It's
No?
very, very interesting. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Thank
Brenda, if you would like
you.
to, I'm sorry I cut you off a little bit. Did you want to say something else?
No, it's been really fun thinking about all of this and our future, and it's fun thinking about it in the context of not just fiction, but also, what it means about who we are as people in our current world. So it's fun. Thank you. Thanks so
Thank
much
you.
for
I
engaging with it.
see Alice Bruno. Alice, are you the member of the club, or you're the guest of Brenda or somebody else's?
She's
I'm a
my
guest
guest.
of Sharyn. She's my sister-in-law.
Oh, okay. All right.
Where is everybody? Where are you? Both.
Florida.
You're in both in Florida?
No, she's in Long Island.
Oh, Alice is in Long
Yes.
Island.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And Brenda's in Texas, right? You're still there. Yes.
I thought you were in Orlando.
That was
I
before.
moved to Orlando, and then I left right in the pandemic, actually.
Okay. We're in Texas. Are you
Houston?
in Austin? Oh, Houston. Very good. There's a good theater, the Alley Theater. Have you
Yeah,
ever-
I have a friend that works there,
Yeah.
and I have never been
Oh, see?
And Donna is,
because
if
I'm on
she's
my
still with
computer all
us,
the time.
oh, Donna is in Spain. If she is there.
Beautiful Malaga.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow,
That-
how nice, Malaga.
yeah.
Mm.
By the
And this-
way, Donna and Charles Johnson are both writers in the anthology. So
Mm,
you can take a
yeah.
look.
Right, we met Donna before on this
Yeah.
forum, yes.
And Charles Johnson also, who's been very quiet this time.
It was
Glad
great.
to see all of you.
Yes.
So nice. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you so
so
much.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Brenda.
Brenda. Thank you, Sharon.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm glad to see you, Bob. Okay.
Welcome back.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.